At what point does the human fetus become a person? At what point does the human fetus become a person? Now, the soul aspect of human beings is what gives us our personality. The soul is what really makes us a person. Because, as we've been noting, man made in the image of God, that means that man was made to be a personal being with intellect, emotions, and a will. The intellect, emotions, and will all belong to the soul, not to the physical body. And the whole practice of morals, decisions we make with regard to morality, all belong to the realm of the soul and not to the realm of the physical body. Now, decisions we make will affect how we use our physical bodies, but it's not the body that makes that decision. It's the soul of the human being that makes that decision. And so, really, the bottom line issue with regard to abortion is this. At what point does the human fetus receive or become a human soul? At what point does the human fetus receive or become a human soul? And the only way to determine the answer to that question is by discerning the origin of the individual soul. The origin of the individual soul. How does each human soul begin, or how does it originate? From where did you derive your soul as a human being? What brought your soul into existence? What I'd like to do is lead you into a study on the whole issue of the origin of the human soul. And we're going to take you through some rather involved things, but we must look at these involved things if we are to understand where we should stand on the whole issue of abortion today in our society and culture. I have to point out to you that historically, there have been 3 different theories concerning the origin of the human soul. This again is historically 3 different theories concerning the origin of the human soul. The first theory has been called the pre-existence theory. The pre-existence theory. Let me describe that theory. According to the pre-existence theory, there exists a community of bodiless souls somewhere in the universe. There exists a community of bodiless souls somewhere in the universe. Somewhere out there in the universe, there's a whole community of souls without a body. Now, interestingly, people who advocate the pre-existence theory sometimes disagree with each other as to when that community of souls came into existence. Some who hold to the pre-existence theory claim that these souls have always existed throughout eternity, that the existence of souls is eternal by nature. And so this community of souls has always existed. It is an eternally existing community of souls. Others who advocate the pre-existence theory say, no, these souls are not eternal, but all these souls were created as a community at one time, sometime in the past. All the souls were created as a community at one time, sometime in the past. Still others who advocate the pre-existence theory for the soul believe that somewhere in the universe there exists what they call the world soul. There's kind of a huge world soul that exists in the universe. Just almost, if you could picture it, like one big lump sum. One big world soul. But according to that approach, either at the time of conception of a human body or at the time of birth of a human body, part of the world soul is separated from the rest of the world soul, and that part that is separated from the world soul is then put inside of this human body, either at the time of conception or at the time of birth. But all three of these expressions ultimately are saying the same thing. Souls pre-exist somewhere in the universe before they are placed into a human body. I would point out to you that the pre-existence theory basically is a pagan view. A pagan view. And to illustrate that, let me just point out a few groups or individuals who have advocated the pre-existence theory. And by no means is this exhaustive. I can only pick out a few. For example, Hinduism, which believes in reincarnation. Hinduism believes and teaches the pre-existence theory of the human soul. Theosophy, which is a kind of a philosophical religious system that is very similar to Hinduism, advocates the pre-existence theory. Theosophy. Interestingly, the Greek philosopher Plato advocated the pre-existence theory for the origin of the human soul. There was at least one Christian leader back in early centuries of the church's existence, a church leader down in Alexandria, Egypt, a man by the name of Origen, who advocated the pre-existence theory of the human soul. But Origen advocated that as a result of the influence of pagan Greek philosophy on his thinking from his pre-conversion days, and tragically, Origen tried to bring a lot of that Greek philosophy over into his Christian theology. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher of a couple centuries ago, advocated the pre-existence theory of the human soul. Many, and please, I'm just saying many, not all, many secular psychologists historically have advocated the pre-existence theory for the origin of the human soul. Let me point out two problems with this theory. Two problems with this theory. One problem is that this theory has no biblical support. It has no biblical support. Nowhere does the Scripture indicate that there have been souls existing before conception of a human fetus. Nowhere does the Bible teach that or even imply that. But a second problem with this theory is that this theory goes contrary to the biblical teaching that all human beings sinned in Adam. Let me state that again, and maybe what we're going to see here is kind of new to you and maybe even a shock to you that the Bible teaches us, but we're going to take you to passages which indicate this. This theory goes contrary to the biblical teaching that all human beings sinned in Adam. In other words, that we all sinned when Adam sinned, that original sin in the Garden of Eden. They might be thinking, where in the world does the Bible teach that? Go with me, please, to the book of Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5, and we want to begin with verse 12. Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. Paul says, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." Some observations here. Paul is saying that sin entered into our world through one man. And if you read further in the context, it's obvious that one man is Adam. Sin entered the world through one man, Adam. Now, you know from the biblical account that both the man and the woman, both Adam and Eve, committed that original sin. But interestingly, the Bible always puts the blame upon the man, Adam, for the fall and for the effect it has upon the human race. And the reason for that is God appointed Adam to be the head of the whole human race. He did not appoint Eve to be the head of the whole human race. He appointed Adam, the man, to be the head of the whole human race. And so even though both the man and the woman committed that original sin, Paul is saying it's through that man, Adam, that sin entered the world, and death by sin. What he's saying is, physical death is the penalty for that original sin. Physical death is the penalty for that original sin. But he goes on to say in verse 12, and so death passed upon all men. Here referred to all human beings. Here's why. For that all have sinned. And let me point out a couple of interesting things about the verb translated have sinned. For one thing, that verb is in the active voice in the Greek text. What Paul is saying is there's some sense in which all human beings who are born through natural means, some sense in which all human beings actively participated in that original sin in the Garden of Eden. And the implication is we all committed, actively participated in that original sin at a point of time when Adam sinned. And Paul's saying the proof of that is that all of us have to face physical death. And the only people who are going to escape physical death, at least of Christians, are those who are alive when the rapture takes place. They will not experience physical death. But if we're not alive when the rapture takes place, all of us, even as Christians, will die physically. And the reason for that is, Paul is saying, that there's a sense in which we actively took part in that original sin in the Garden of Eden, and physical death is the penalty for participation in that original sin. Drop down to verse 17. For if by one man's offense death reigned by one. Notice he's saying death reigns over all of us because of that one sin back there in the Garden of Eden. Look at verse 18. Therefore, as by the offense of one, judgment came upon all men to condemnation. Notice, all of us suffer the judgment of physical death because of that one sin, that original sin in the Garden of Eden. Look at verse 19. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners. All of us were made sinners as a result of that first sin, that one sin, back there near the beginning of time in the Garden of Eden. This is indicating that in some sense, every human being who's a descendant of Adam, and every one of us in this room here today is a descendant of Adam, that every human being who's a descendant of Adam through natural means of procreation, there's some sense in which we actively participated in that original sin. There's some sense in which we sinned when Adam sinned, and the judgment for that is that we all face physical death. And so the fact that we all face physical death is the proof that we somehow participated in that original sin in the Garden of Eden. And you're probably thinking to yourself, how in the world could we have participated in it? I didn't exist at that point. Well, you know, it's interesting. The whole human race existed in seed form, in seminal form, in Adam's loins when that original sin was committed. Have you ever thought of that? You know, since all of us are physical descendants of Adam, the whole human race existed in seed or seminal form in Adam's loins, there in the Garden of Eden. And so, for want of a better term, there was a seminal participation by the whole human race in that original sin in the Garden of Eden. And Lord willing, we're going to look at a passage in the book of Hebrews that points out a similar thing where that same principle is involved. where somebody who wasn't even born yet, in a sense, participated in an act that one of his ancestors carried out, and it was a seminal form of participation. Look again, please, at 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 22. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 22, where Paul says, "For as in Adam all die." Notice again, we all face physical death because of our relationship to Adam. We were all in him, in seminal form, in the seed in his loins, when that original sin was committed. And so, in Adam, all of us die. Notice, not in Eve. Sorry, guys, but God puts the blame for the mess the human race is in upon the man, not upon the woman. As in Adam, all die. Now, the significance of this with regard to the pre-existence theory of the origin of the human soul is this. Sin comes out of the soul of the human being, not the physical body. The soul is where the will resides and functions. And so we determine to sin during our lifetime, and so sin is related to the realm of the soul. The soul, with the sin nature inside of it, really is the source of the sins that we commit. And so if souls pre-existed somewhere in the universe before you and I were conceived, that means those souls had no tie-in with Adam at all. They had no tie-in with Adam at all. If they existed totally unrelated to human beings on the face of the earth, pre-existed somewhere in the universe, they had no relationship to Adam. And since that's true, how then could all of us be sinners if our soul had no relationship to our original ancestor, Adam? And so what we're saying here is, this theory of the preexistence of the soul really goes contrary to the biblical teaching that all human beings sinned in Adam. The only way we could have sinned in Adam, since sin is related to the soul aspect of man, is if somehow our soul was related to Adam. The only way we could have sinned in Adam is if somehow our human soul was tied in with him and related to him as the head of the whole human race. A second theory that some have proposed for the origin of the human soul, the next one after the preexistence theory, has been called the creation theory. The creation theory. And let me describe that theory. According to the creation theory, each human body, referring to the physical part of man, each human body is procreated by human parents. So according to this theory, we get our body from our parents. Each human body is procreated by human parents. But according to creation theory, it says, but each human soul is created directly and individually by God. Each human soul is created directly and individually by God, and then is placed in the human fetus. Each human soul, according to creation theory, is created directly and individually by God, and then is placed in the human fetus, either at the time of conception, or at the time of birth, or at some time between conception and birth. And you'd have advocates of the creation theory disagreeing as to the point of time when this newly created soul is put in the human fetus. So they would say it is then placed in the human fetus either at the time of conception, or at the time of birth, or at some time between conception and birth. Now obviously, if you believe it's put in the fetus at the time of conception, then you would believe that human fetus is a total human being, a complete person from the time of conception on. And that would have implications as to what you believe, whether or not abortion would be all right from the time of conception on. But if you believe God creates a human soul and then puts it in the human fetus at the time of birth, then you can conclude that fetus is not a complete human being, not a complete human person until the time of birth, when the soul is put into the fetus. Or if you say it's sometime between conception and birth, you would say it's not a complete human being until the time between conception and birth that God creates a soul and puts it into that fetus. But up until that time, it's not a complete human being, and so you might conclude that therefore up until that time, it's all right to abort. You see how these things relate significantly to the whole issue of abortion. Now, I would point out to you that as far as proponents of this theory, there are many Christians historically who have held to the creation theory as far as the origin of the human soul is concerned, that God creates each human soul individually and directly and then puts it into the human fetus. Thankfully, many Christians have held to that. I believe that God creates a soul, puts it in the fetus at the moment of conception, and therefore that fetus is a complete human being with a soul from the time of conception on. So there have been many godly Christians who have held to the creation theory for the soul. Just as an example, Ambrose, who was an outstanding bishop of the church in the city of Milan, Italy, back in the late 300s, early 400s A.D., held to the creation theory for the origin of the human soul. Charles Hodge, who was an outstanding theologian, very godly Christian man, outstanding Christian theologian at Princeton Seminary back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, believed in the creation of the soul directly and individually by God, and then God put it into the fetus. So there have been many fine Christians who have held to this particular theory. I would point out to you, though, that I personally am convinced there are several problems with the creation theory for the origin of the human soul. So let me relate to you some of the problems that I see with this. The first one is that this theory really has no biblical support. I can't find anything in the Word of God that either states or implies that God creates each human soul directly and individually and then puts it into the human fetus. So that, as far as I can tell, it has no biblical support. Second problem with the theory is this theory is hard-pressed to explain. It's hard-pressed to explain the biblical teaching that all human beings sinned in Adam. You know, that we just looked at from Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15. It's really hard-pressed to explain the biblical teaching that all human beings sinned in Adam. You know, how could all human beings have participated in Adam's original sin if each of their souls was created directly and individually by God sometime after that original sin? You know, just think about, let's suppose the creation theory is right, and think about your soul. I think I'd be safe in saying that everybody in this auditorium today was conceived and born sometime during the present 20th century. Well, according to the creation theory of the soul, then your soul wasn't created by God directly and individually until sometime in the 20th century, maybe at the time of your conception, and put into your fetus at that time. But the 20th century is thousands of years after that original sin in the Garden of Eden. And so if your soul didn't come into existence until thousands of years after the original sin in the Garden of Eden, how could your soul have been related to that original sin? It couldn't have been. And so it seems to me that this creation theory of the origin of the human soul is hard-pressed to explain then, how is it that all human beings participated in that original sin in the Garden of Eden, and therefore experienced the judgment of physical death? Seems to me there's a third problem with the creation theory. This theory is hard-pressed to explain the sinful nature of all human beings. It's hard-pressed to explain the sinful nature of all human beings. Let me approach that with a question. If each soul is created directly and individually by God, then why does every human being have a natural tendency to sin? You know, since our sin is related to our soul and the function of our will, which is a major part of the soul, if each soul was created directly and individually by God, then why does every human being have a natural tendency to sin? We all do. Those of you who have young children, you know that. Their sin nature gets expressed very early in life. And does this mean then that God creates a sinful soul? You'd almost be forced to conclude that, since we all have a natural tendency to sin from the time we're born on. Since that's true of us, you're almost forced to conclude then God must create sinful souls if every soul was created directly and individually by God. Seems to me there's a fourth problem with the creation theory as well. This theory really cannot explain adequately the fact that children often inherit the intellectual and character qualities of their parents. That children often inherit the intellectual and character qualities of their parents, as well as the physical qualities of their parents. And that's true. So many children, not just in their physical appearance in many instances, but even in their intellectual and character qualities, are really reflections of their parents. Well, if God creates each soul individually and directly, then why do children often resemble their parents in their intellectual and character traits? Remember again, intellect is one of the things that makes us a person. Intellect is a function of the soul, not of the body, not of the physical body, but a function of the soul. You know, John in Revelation chapter 6, where he's given a vision of souls, bodiless souls, underneath an altar up in heaven, they're talking. They're conscious, and they are using human language to communicate their concerns. They're crying out to God, "How long do you avenge our blood against those who have murdered us?" Which says intellect belongs to the realm of the soul, not to a body, not to a physical body, because these are bodiless souls that can communicate intellectually concepts and ideas. If children have the same intellectual traits as well as character traits, personality traits of their parents, how could they have that if God creates each soul individually and directly and then puts it into a human fetus? Well, there's a third major theory that some have proposed concerning the origin of the human soul. And I'm going to give you the title of this, and this word may be new to you, and I'll spell it out for you so that for those of you who are taking notes, you can get it down. This one has been called the traducian theory. The traducian theory. Let me spell traducian. T-R-A-D-U-C-I-A-N. The traducian theory. They might be thinking, how in the world did anybody come up with that name for this theory? Well, students of the Word of God got this name from a Latin verb, traduco, spelled T-R-A-D-U-C-O, traduco. And the reason they adopted that Latin verb as the title for their theory is because of what that Latin verb means. Let me give you the meanings of this Latin verb, traduco. It means to bring across, to bring across, to transport across, to transport across, to transfer, to transfer. So to bring across, to transport across, to transfer. And I think as I describe this theory, you'll see the significance of the meanings of that Latin verb. It fits the theory very well, and in light of that, those who propose this theory have adopted that Latin verb and made it into the title for their theory, the traducian theory. Let me describe the traducian theory for you. According to this theory, each human soul is procreated by human parents. Each human soul is procreated by human parents through conception. Each human soul is procreated by human parents through conception. Let me explain it another way. The individual human soul is brought into existence at the time of conception. The individual human soul is brought into existence at the time of conception through the union of the male sperm with the female egg. The individual human soul is brought into existence at the time of conception through the union of the male sperm with the female egg. Do you see the idea there of bringing across, transporting across, or transferring? The idea is the human soul is brought over to this new human being from the parents. It's transported from the parents to this new human being. In other words, we get our soul from our parents through procreation at the moment of conception. According to the traducian theory, therefore, this means that entire persons, not just bodies, are propagated by human parents. Entire persons, not just bodies, are propagated by parents. In other words, I got my total being through my parents. And actually, then ultimately through my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and going the whole way back to Adam. We're procreated by our parents in our totality, according to the traducian theory. And you can see, therefore, this is saying that there is a human soul there from the moment of conception on. And therefore, according to the traducian theory, this is a total human being. That fetus is a total human being from the moment of conception on, even with a soul. Now, let me just name for you some of the advocates of this theory. Throughout the history of the church have been many fine Christians who have advocated this. Just to name a few here, Tertullian, T-E-R-T-U-L-L-I-N. Tertullian was a very prominent church leader who lived from around 160 up to 220 A.D., very early in the church's history, from about 160 to 220 A.D. Tertullian believed and advocated the traducian theory for the origin of the human soul. Bringing it much closer to our lifetime, Jonathan Edwards, who's been regarded as one of the most outstanding preachers in the history of America, played a key role in the Great Awakening during colonial times here in America, and who eventually became the president of Princeton. Jonathan Edwards, very godly man, believed and taught this theory for the origin of the human soul. Interestingly, many Lutheran theologians historically. Many Lutheran theologians historically have believed and taught this. I've just given you a few samples out of many, many, many that could be given here of those who have held to this. Now, what I want to do now, and just start with this, and then Lord willing, we'll pick up this point and continue on tomorrow, is I want to start now giving you evidences for the tradition theory. Evidences for the tradition theory. And there are several lines of evidence for the tradition theory. The first line of evidence is this: certain scriptures imply this theory. Certain scriptures imply this theory. And for the sake of time, let me take you to just one of those scriptures today, and Lord willing, we'll look at more of them tomorrow. But turn with me, please, to Genesis chapter 5 and verse 3. Genesis chapter 5 and verse 3. Where Moses wrote, "And Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth." Look at that statement. Adam begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. Now, we've been talking about man being created in the image and likeness of God, and we saw that what's involved in that is that man was created to be a personal being and a moral being. And both morality and personality belong to the realm of the soul. And so certainly those two things were involved in this as well, of Adam begetting a son. Adam begat a son in his own likeness, after his image. That seems to imply that Adam was a source for Seth's soul, involving personality and moral responsibility. That seems to imply that. But Lord willing, tomorrow we're going to look at some passages that imply it much more strongly than this passage. We're going to see passages where the Bible talks about persons coming out of the loin of a man. Not just a body, but persons coming from the loin of a man. That's stated more than once in the Bible, which implies it's a total person that's procreated by parents, not just a physical body that's procreated by parents.